When we stand in the principles and we know where we want to go, we have the power and the will within our souls. We will choose who our friends will be, and we identify our enemies. We hold the keys to a new reality. Let us share the truth of our history. Acknowledge what we've done and feel the greatness from which we've come. Remember that a fruit never falls far from its tree. So like our ancestors, we must control our destiny. Self-determination. 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 So as we educate our children, tell the truth. Let us always think about the millions who came before and sacrificed their lives so that our mighty people would survive. And the glory of our past we soon revive, yeah. Every day we face a challenge. You and I, our future's hanging in the balance. So we must do whatever can be done. We must not be dependent on anyone. That way we can be sure that our interests are secure. Please tell me why in this world others thrive while you and I daily cry as we try to survive. Please tell me why. Self-determination. It means self-determination. Hey, self-determination. You know we need self-determination. 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 Self-determination.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Good morning. I see quite a few of y'all on Facebook and YouTube. We thank you so much for joining us. My name is Onya Sanu. I am an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party in New Mexico. Good morning, Bird. Great to see you. This is APRP New Mexico's weekly program, Weekly Pan-African News. As longtime viewers will know, we started this show over a year ago. Good morning, Ricky. Good morning, Sally Boo. Everybody's here. But as longtime viewers know, we started this show at the beginning of the pandemic back in 2020. We wanted to continue to build with our people, continue engaging in revolutionary Pan-African analysis, but we also understood that we could not safely gather our people under those circumstances. And so the weekly program was one of the ways that we came up with to continue to reach our people, continue to talk to and build with our people in a virtual format. We've done it every single Thursday for over a year. We've had many, many guests and talked about many subjects. So it's been a very great experience building with all of y'all. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is a revolutionary Pan-African socialist party, so we're not doing this show for entertainment. We're doing it as a means of engaging in political education and political building with our people, particularly African people. Our political objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa, and the APRP was founded 52 years ago by one Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was, of course, the first democratically elected president of the first nation to gain independence in Africa. That nation was Ghana, and on Ghana's first Independence Day, Kwame Nkrumah famously said that the independence of Ghana was meaningless without the total liberation of Africa. He then was overthrown by the U.S. government shortly afterwards, despite trying to build socialism in Ghana. And after he was overthrown and in exile in Guinea with Sekou Touré, he wrote the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, where he called for the formation of this organization. That's why we exist. That's why I'm talking to you. That's why we do the show. So you will probably know that we start with a couple of things on every single episode of Weekly Pan-African News. I do the intro, talk about who I am and who we are, which I just did. The other thing that we always do is that we want to call in a revolutionary African ancestor. And the reason why we do that is because we understand as revolutionary African people, as revolutionary Pan-Africanists, that none of the work that we're doing today would be possible without the contributions and sacrifices of our ancestors. We are literally standing on their shoulders. I would not be here talking to you on the internet without the sacrifices and contributions and brilliance of revolutionary African people who came before me. So we would be remiss not to honor the legacy and work of those people. And the ancestor we want to call in today is a revolutionary African, a hero of the Cuban Revolution, a hero of Cuba's solidarity missions in Africa. That ancestor is Harry Villegas, also known as Pombo. Pombo is the Spanish word for leaf. As I mentioned, Harry Villegas is a hero of the Cuban Revolution, y'all. He was up in the Sierra Maestra with Fidel and Che. He was fighting on the front lines of the Cuban Revolution. His family had a long history of fighting for Cuban independence from colonialism, first from the Spanish, and then, of course, from the United States. After the success of the armed phase of the Cuban Revolution, he maintained that military hero status by engaging in solidarity missions, internationalist missions in Africa, most famously in the Congo, under the leadership of Che Guevara. But he was also a military leader in Cuban internationalist missions in Angola and Nicaragua as well. He was designated a hero of the Republic of Cuba and the Brigade General of the Revolutionary Armed Forces. So this is a true hero, a true war hero. Like here in the United States, we get war heroes who like rape kids and like burn down women and children's housing and stuff like that. But Pombo was like an actual war hero who fought for liberation in Africa, in Central America, and in the Caribbean. All over the world, he was fighting side by side with African and colonized people fighting for liberation. So we lift up Pombo, we thank him for his sacrifices, and we honor his name today. The other thing that we always do at the beginning of every show is that we want to acknowledge that we are on stolen land. The entire Western Hemisphere, most of Africa, and like quite a bit of Asia is stolen land, y'all. Colonizers came here hundreds of years ago, committed massacres of indigenous peoples, including women and children, straight up stole their land, destroyed their societies, and built this monstrosity on top of it. But those indigenous people still exist. I'm talking to you from so-called Albuquerque, but Albuquerque belongs to the Tiwa Nation. It is Tiwa territory, and there are, in fact, Tiwa people still here, like some of our comrades in Pueblo Action Alliance. So this is still their land. This land remains stolen. No matter how long ago these European colonizers took it, it still belongs to the Tiwa Nation. Just like Africa belongs to African people, no matter how long ago this colonizer stole it from us. So we want to say that we are on stolen land. This is Tiwa territory. We also say that we are not using that metaphorically. We intend to fight side by side with indigenous and colonized peoples all around the world so that they can get their land back, just as we are fighting day by day, every single hour to fight to get our land in Africa back. So that was the land acknowledgement. I see some more people said hi. Hello, KD. Hello, Miko. Hello, Monica. Greetings. Thanks y'all so much for joining us. And also, please hit that share button and that like button so you can get more eyes on this stream. So the other thing that we do every single show is that we always have a political education segment. You're not going to go to any All African People's Revolutionary Party event anywhere on this planet without getting some aspect of political education. We are a propaganda party. We are seeking to raise the consciousness of our people. We are seeking to get our people to understand how this system was built, how we got into the condition we're in right now, and how we can move collectively to change that condition. And so that requires political education. We do it with everything we do. And the PE topic for the show today is something I'm very excited about. We have another guest, a revolutionary African guest. Today we're going to be talking to Obi Egbuna Jr. He is a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, an organizer, a journalist, a father with the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association, as well as a founding member and executive director of the Mass Emphasis Children's History and Theater Company. So Obi, if you can hear me, I would love for you to have you join me so we can proceed with the interview. Hello.
Hi. Oh, hi.
Greetings. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Humble.
Yeah. So we can jump right into the questions. First, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about yourself. Who is Obi Egbuna Jr. and how did you come into the struggle for our people's liberation?
I would say all of our people in the tradition of the African fighting spirit I was born into. Organizational skills. You mentioned I'm a journalist. I have the honor of being the U.S. correspondent to Zimbabwe's national newspaper, the Herald. I'm the first one in 41 years of the nation. I'm the external relations officer of the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association, which will be the springboard for our conversation today. I'm a children's playwright. You mentioned I'm a co-founder of the Mass Emphasis Children's History and Theater Company. And I'm the technical advisor to the Mass Emphasis Positive Action and Creativity Youth Brigade, which is a vehicle that's synonymous with Mass Emphasis. And I'm also an African history teacher, teaching primarily K through 12, which I've been doing for 31 years. So my political activity, if I'm going to say the first time I did something, at 9 years old, I marched in African Liberation Day in 1979. And so that's how I was introduced. But when I made the decision to be a lifelong frontline participant was 19 turning 20. So you're talking like between 1989 and 1990, and have never taken a day off, never taken a minute off, never taken a second off since then. Bloodline, people are starting to know more about it. My father, Obi Egbuna Jr, is the co-founder of the Black Panther Party in London and the Black Power movement in London. And his link with Kwame Ture, happy belated birthday to Kwame Ture, who would have been 80. They linked up at the Dialectics of Liberation Conference in 1967. And so the voice of Black Power, one of the voices of Black Power in London, links up with one of the main voices of Black Power in the United States. And they both proudly consider themselves disciples of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. My father is mentioned by name in Nkrumah's pamphlet, The Specter of Black Power. And my father was one of the people that persuaded the Osagyefo to do his pamphlet, Message to the Black Peoples of Britain, taking into consideration the milieu at the time. While my father was there, Maurice Bishop was studying law at Gray's Inn. Fela Kuti was studying music. Dr. Walter Rodney was working on his PhD. Tony Martin, the world-renowned Garveyite, no longer with us physically, was there working with African students born out of the Caribbean. On the cultural side of things, my dad was a playwright and an author as well. So, and my mother is the rock of the family. So that's a little bit personal stuff. So I hope that gives people an idea.
Yeah, you were truly born into the struggle. I mean, we all are, as you said, but like having that level of revolutionary African cadre around you as you were growing up, that's incredible. So yes. Can you talk about your political awakening? Because I know you were around that, but how did you yourself decide that the African Revolution was for you?
Like I said, that experience just, I was crying, I was kicking, I wanted to play football around the neighborhood with my friends, but they put me in all white, they made me go and get a haircut, and they made me march. And so I did that from 1979 to 1983, 4 straight years. But in terms of something deliberate on my end, I was in Virginia Beach in 1989 when the National Guard trampled on African youth there for what is called Freaknik. Forgive the term, that's what they call it. And people were just down there socializing, and they called in the National Guard. And to just watch them in action And then a year later, students at Howard University, the University of the District of Columbia, George Washington University, University of Maryland, College Park, what young people now call the DMV and is part of the world, the DC metropolitan Virginia, DC, Maryland, Virginia. We organized a boycott of Virginia Beach that was very successful. So that was the first time that we recognized that we could wage resistance against what we used to call the military industrial intelligence police complex, which we now call the Homeland Security apparatus. So right after that, we began to study the Black United Front construct of 1968, where organizations in DC were able to come together and create an umbrella, which would serve as a vehicle and inspiration for organized formations throughout the United States. Kwame Ture was part of that. Lester McKinney, now known as Baba Zulu, was part of that. Calvin Rolock was part of that. So we figured we could do something like that amongst students and youth. And then after that, it could give the traditional organizations a boost from the young people, which would be much needed, so we could have an African United Front. And then a year later, we had a conference, Easter weekend, paying homage to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee at Howard University. And we came up with something called the Pan-African Student Youth United Front, which became the Pan-African Student Youth Movement, which became the Pan-African Liberation Organization. So that process had to run from 1990 to 2007. And so through that is how we cut our bones and our teeth and struggle.
It's no small feat to develop an organization, to help build an organization that lasts for that long. So I hope you know the significance of that.
Yes.
So I want to get a little bit into your Cuba solidarity work. That's actually how I first heard about you. I saw an interview with you where you were just like dropping knowledge about how African Cuba is and about Cuba's internationalist missions in Africa. And so I want folks to get that analysis from you. So first question along that vein is, you have a campaign called the # Get Out of Cuba's Way campaign. Can you talk about the purpose and history of it?
For you, I'm going to do something totally different today, if that's okay.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to 6th grade in 1980 and bring it all the way up to today. Was that cool?
Yes.
Okay. So, actually, before that, when I was growing up in Nigeria, my dad used to do this thing every Saturday morning where, like, from 7 in the morning till about 12 at noon, he would just play music. And he would always play One Time Memory. So the first historical figure I learned about in the Cuban revolutionary process was Jose Marti, who the Cuban people considered the apostle of the revolution. So that's the first point of reference. So when I was younger, I wanted to be a boxer. That was my thing. I wanted Sugar Ray Robinson and Muhammad Ali were my idols, my inspirations. But I fell in love with someone else. It's a Cuban boxer named Tafio Stevenson, who is considered the greatest amateur boxer in the history of amateur boxing. He's a Spanish-speaking African out of Cuba. So I remember in 1980 when Cuba boycotted the 1980 Olympics. So my father and mother would talk about that around the house. So that was a point of reference. So I followed the rest of his career, which ended like in the mid-'80s. So he was the most dominant amateur boxer from the early 70s to the mid-'80s. So he was a point of reference. Then I remember in 1983, the assassination of Maurice Bishop, the revolutionary freedom fighter and leader of the New Jew movement. And I was in 8th grade. So I remember my mother and father being very upset about that. And we know that the Reagan administration invaded Grenada under the false pretext of Grenada's new airport being a missile dump site for Cuba and the Soviet Union, which was a lie. And Maurice Bishop came to the United States and told people that at Hunter College and Medgar Evers College and a few other places. So I remember that. In 1984, Brian De Palma created a movie called Scarface. Now that movie is responsible for many of my personal friends getting involved in the blue collar crime wave. And as that movie has been popularized in hip hop, as that movie has been popularized in Western popular culture, many people forgot the initial motivation for the movie being created in the first place. And that movie was created as an anti-Cuban revolutionary propaganda film. In the beginning of the movie, is Comandante Fidel Castro's speech about the Mario boat lift. And he's talking about the thousands of Cubans who, as he said it, were unwilling to adapt to the spirit of the revolution. They yearned for the days when Lucky Luciano used Cuba to transport heroin into the United States. They yearned for the day when Maya Lansky, his partner, had gambling casinos all over Cuba, and they were involved in a prostitution racket together. And Cuba was an extension of La Cosa Nostra's criminal empire inside United States borders. So once I saw how that movie was aimed at vilifying Cuba, it was in contrast to what I heard my parents speak about in such a very favorable manner. So that was that. And then taking it up to 1995 now, we had a chance to meet our brother who is the current Cuban ambassador to Colombia in South America, Jose Luis Ponce Carabello, who at that time was deported from the United States in 1996 as an act of diplomatic hostility and aggression. So we had started working with him. In 1997, the youngest member of the Pan-African Student Youth Movement went to Cuba for the International Youth Festival. And it was their year to host it. And this was a very pivotal time because this was during that cluster that Cubans call in their history the special period, when the Soviet Union abandoned socialism and abandoned them in the process and basically left them for dead. So the blockade really had its impact during this period. And this is during the same time that they scored one of their most important victories when Pope John Paul I came to Cuba. And even though he did what they knew he would do, and he was considered the most anti-socialist pope in Vatican history. He played a crucial role in the creation of the movement called Solidarios, which helped bring down the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia and Poland. So they thought that he was open and calling for the removal of the Sandinistas from power in Nicaragua. So they thought he would come to Cuba and he would dance on their grave. But he shocked everyone by saying he was against the blockade. It was outdated. It was illogical. It was counterproductive. So that was a very significant victory for them. So during this period, the very next year, we had a project called the Martin Luther King Jr. Honorable Elijah Muhammad Project. It was dealing with anti-militarism in every respect. And a very crucial aspect of that work was looking at the military bases that the United States had all over the world. So we obviously turned our attention to Guantanamo Bay. 2 years after that, I began to work at Bowie State University, and through doing some organizing there with faculty and students, we had Bowie State University primed to be the first historical Black college and university to have a cultural exchange program with Cuba. That same year, we were guests at the Organization of Caribbean and Latin American Youth Congress in Cuba, which was the first time that Comandante Fidel Castro made his public comments about the Elian Gonzalez kidnapping. In 2001, we went to El Salvador when most people had their eyes set on Durban. A very important meeting in El Salvador took place about a United States military initiative called Plan Colombia, which was US militarism under the guise of the drug trade. And then right after that, a couple of years later in Washington, DC General Hospital closed down, which is the public hospital. And that was in the southeast section of DC, which is the poorest part of DC, which left that part of DC without ambulatory care or a prenatal care unit. So we had made a push for Cuban medical personnel to come there and take over the hospital. And this is a couple of years before they offered to send 1,500 environmental disaster specialists through the Henry Reeve Brigade to the Katrina region. And and we got about 150 pastors on a Sunday after church to do what was called a pray-in. People have heard of sit-ins, people have heard of walk-ins. We were able to organize a pray-in. And then about 6 months later, Assemblyman Councilman Charles Barron in New York City, who was then a city councilman in Brooklyn, he called a press conference with us. And through that press conference, he called for Cuban medical personnel to come to New York City. And I'll stop right there for now, and I'll get into the more updated things. But I just wanted to give you like an overview of some of the work that we've been in a strategic position to do. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, yes, because the if you in the second scene, the main scene of the movie that set the tone for the movie, Tony Montana is coming through immigration, and he's talking about wearing the same clothes, wearing shoes with no bottoms on there, military members of the Cuban army on every corner, watching every word you say, telling you what to think, telling you how to think, and that's the persecution that he was escaping from. The other thing to make mention of is that movie was made only 1 year after Ronald Reagan, the Reagan administration, bankrolled the Cuban American National Foundation, which became the main opposition outlet to the Communist Party of Cuba. They did that in Miami, and it is through that organization that the terrorists like Posada Corrales and Orlando Dr. Death Bosch through Alpha 66 and Brothers to the Rescue. The Cuban American National Foundation was the cover for that type of activity. And so when we take a look at the 635 assassination attempts on the life of Comandante Fidel Castro, that was made possible. So the movie Scarface was meant to camouflage all of that. Because of the crack epidemic, Tony Montana became a larger than life figure. That character Al Pacino created was to the crack era what Ron O'Neal's character in Superfly was to the heroin and prostitution racket 12, 15 years before. So for people who don't think that Hollywood is a propaganda instrument, this is one of the best illustrations of it. And it was so impactful that people didn't even realize what the original objective of that movie was. And that movie made many teenagers of that time want to dedicate their life to blue collar crime, which we know in the larger scheme of things is poor people's crime, desperate people's crime, angry people's crime, isolated people's crime, dehumanized people's crime. And since we function under capitalism being at its mercy under the mode of survival, it makes all the sense in the world why that aspect of the narrative would gravitate to us. Because till this very day, we use our resistance against racism to climb up the imaginary ladder of capitalism. And this is why people think that poverty is not something that should be eradicated, something that should be smashed. We think it's something that should be escaped, and we'll do anything to escape it. Some people play the lottery every day just to escape it. Women sell their bodies just to escape it. Some people work on their speed so they can run a 4.3 in the 40-yard dash, hoping that'll get them to the NFL combine to escape it. So this movie represents that tradition, that negative tradition, that genocidal tradition. And so we are hoping that all of the artists that were manipulated into, brainwashed into, indoctrinated into embracing the legacy of Tony Montana, they will now help us in the fight to defend the integrity of the Cuban people and Cuban revolution.
And speaking of using a struggle against racism to climb the ladder under capitalism, you mentioned that you were in a conference in El Salvador at the same time as a more publicized conference was happening in Durban. I think that conference was the conference about reparations for slavery. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, the United Nations Conference Against Racism, Xenophobia, and Other Related Intolerances, where the Bush administration said that the Palestinian question, the reparations question, and the question of our captivity, we don't use the word slavery, those things should not be on the agenda. But there was a meeting equally as important that took place in El Salvador that was dealing with this initiative of Plan Colombia, which is the equivalent to Latin America, what AFRICOM is, the United States Africa Military Command question on the African continent, but it was under the false pretext of stopping drugs. And at the time, the United States government and the government of El Salvador had reached an agreement to build a US military base adjacent to the national airport in San Salvador. So people came from all over the Americas down there. And we remembered the powerful presentation that the Cubans gave about what the broader ramifications of that question was.
Sorry, there's gonna be a little pause because I have to mute when you're talking, unmute when you're talking. But the interesting thing about, where you were at the time in El Salvador, and also like the implications, like the continent-wide implications of Plan Colombia, which, by the way, Joe Biden was an architect of. But at the
Yes.
same time, this reparations, or the reparations conference was happening in Durban. It got like all the press, but it was solely a discussion of reparations within the framework of the existing capitalist imperialist system. And there's like huge limitations when we talk about anti-racist struggle, when we talk about giving reparations, if we're talking about doing so while capitalism still exists. There's huge limitations in terms of what is going to be possible in terms of redress. It's just going to be exacerbated class contradictions. It's going to be like the petty bourgeois of African people taking the reparations, the rest of us getting nothing. So it's just like, it's very interesting to me, like how you were in El Salvador, and the place where you had what you were there protesting had much bigger implications for us as a people than that conference in Durban. But Durban gets all the press. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Well, people go where they go based on their exposure. But actually, we had our eyes on Durban too, because in 2001 was the same year that the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act was imposed. And one of the reasons why they were vehemently against reparations being on the agenda, because at that particular point in time in history, when we talked about reparations, we talked about it in the context of land, not in the context of compensation. So that automatically elevated a platform for Zimbabwe, who had just embarked on a historic land reclamation program where they had returned land from 1,500 commercial farmers of Rhodesian and British ancestry to 350,000 indigenous families, where the average family consists of 6 people. I mean, yeah, so that automatically, and the fact that it was being held in Azania, South Africa, which at the time, 83% of our land was still in the hands of the former colonizers under the monstrous apartheid system. So the fact that Zimbabwe had raised the bar in terms of the question of land reclamation, raised the bar in relationship to self-determination, that automatically made them extremely paranoid about the character of how Durban could take on. And interestingly enough, the best presentation, in many people's opinion, at Durban was given by Comandante Fidel Castro, and he let it be known that Cuba wants reparations for the blockade, which modernizes the question, expands the question, challenges the white supremacist definition of America that Biden subscribes to, that every US president is subscribed to, that is so fascist in its tone, fascist in its underlay and its overlay, that it would make Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini envious if they were still here, angry that they didn't think of it first. So the fact that they proclaimed to be America. So while business was being handled in El Salvador, business was being handled in Durban, it's just a question of whose narrative that you're going to run with. The social democratic, radical, moderate narrative is dominant, but that's what we're up against right now. But it doesn't, it's beautiful to challenge it, and it's beautiful to provide an alternative to it in everything we do every day. So this is where I wanted to get into some of the practical things that we have been able to do in the last few years. You love our children. I remember my first conversation with you 10 years ago. Our children, the second play the Mass Emphasis Children's History and Theater Company ever did was called Cuba's Greatest Army, a tribute to the Cuban doctors. And according to what we were told by the Cubans, it's the first children's play about the Cuban doctors outside of Cuba ever done. So we were definitely humbled by that feat. And there's been an ongoing conversation that Mass Emphasis is going to have the first children to children's exchange with La Comunita, the Cuban Children's National Theater Ensemble. So we're so humbled by that. We just have to get down there at some point and sign the papers. The verbal agreement has already been had. And we were asked to perform it for the International Day of Solidarity with the Cuban Five. So at the Venezuelan ambassador's home in the amphitheater is where that was performed. So that was 10 years ago. 11 years ago, we had met him back in 2005, my brother, Mutulu Olubala, affectionately known as M1 of the internationally acclaimed hip hop group Dead Prez. So we met each other. So we did that press conference. He was supposed to be at the press conference we had with Councilman Barron, but there was a schedule mix up. But he was on the press release, and he definitely lent his voice to that effort. So we had a chance to meet. when we were involved in a United Nations project around naked police terrorism inside United States borders. So what ended up happening is when he made a connection to me by name, he said, "Oh yeah, I've been reading your stuff in the Herald, and we should do some music around Cuba and Zimbabwe." And so at the time we were thinking about one song, and then what became a conversation around one song ended up being a call for artists all over the world to do music. And from 2013 to 2016, we did 3 albums called The Battle Cry for Cuba and Zimbabwe, multi-genre, cross-generational. And people can get it on Battle Cuba Zim, ZIM, ZIM.wordpress.com. It's free. We're not selling anything. And it's over 100 songs of music. And we did that between 2013 and 2016. We B2Aya, the #1 hip hop group in Venezuela, which considers themselves Yoruba, they're part of that. A group called Native Son that is considered the Dead Prez of Cuba. One of the last poets is on it. One of the original singers for you young people of the legendary R&B group, The Moments. So it's some beautiful music on there of all sorts. So we did that. Recently, last year, our children in the Mass Emphasis Positive Action and Creativity Youth Brigade, they did a mini documentary, which is the one you saw, calling for Cuban medical personnel to be the way to be cleared for the Henry Reeve Medical Brigade to come to the United States to lend their efforts to the fight to eradicate the corona pandemic, the genocidal corona pandemic. And that was done by a 16-year-old named Sia Lee Wright, a 20-year-old named Zion Utsi, who created the music at the end of it, and a 21-year-old named Jalen Mitchell. And the mini doc is about 8 minutes and 30 seconds long, which means that it took our youth less time than it took terrorist police to take the life of George Floyd in Minnesota. It took them less time to identify themselves with the heroic revolutionary efforts of the Cuban people. And since then, in July of last year and February of this year, we did 2 cultural tributes, what people would call concerts, talking about Cuba's medical efforts and the Get Out of Cuba Way campaign. And when you combine both concerts together, sister, we had artists representing 10 African nations, 8 Caribbean nations, 17 US cities, and 5 European Union countries. Never before done in terms of artistic solidarity with the Cuban people. And we did an appeal where we got organizations from all over the world to support the push for them to be in the United States. And we were told by some naysayers that it was poorly written, our appeal. They were very critical. They wanted an intellectual sword fight on the internet. We were not going to give them that. And we ended up getting the support from people like the Honorable Samia Nkrumah, Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's daughter, which is very pivotal because the Osajifo is the first head of state to openly recognize the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. Mumia Abu-Jamal and Russell Maroon Schultz, fighting for their lives behind enemy lines, supported that effort. The National Council of Churches, and we purposely did an appeal in the tradition of David Walker's appeal, in the tradition of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey's appeal to white America in 1923. Dr. Du Bois' appeal in 1947, which Eleanor Roosevelt did everything to sabotage, and in the tradition of the appeal Brother Malcolm wanted to do, but the New York Police Department, FBI, and CIA had other ideas. So these are, and the second phase of our project, the Get Out of Cuba Way campaign, is coming, where we are calling for Africans in the diaspora to create a resource pool that will support Cuba's medical work on the African continent, where they have 4,000 medical personnel dispersed throughout Africa, dealing with a multitude of issues, which offers our people an alternative to the United States Agency for International Development, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Jimmy Carter Foundation, the Carter Center, the Clinton Foundation, the Bush Foundation, at a moment where the largest highway in Ghana is named in honor of George Bush, at a time where they say that because of non-communicable diseases, it was said 10 years ago at the UN that between 2011 and 2038, 57 million deaths are being expected on the planet from strokes, diabetes, heart attacks. And at a time where There are 784 million people on the planet living on $1.90 a day, and 400 million of them can be found in Mother Africa. And of the 25 nations that are considered the most extremely poor nations on the planet, 22 of them can be found in Africa. So here's a nation which is an extension of Africa, Cuba, because of how they endured colonialism, how our ancestors were brought there by force, and how they've endured and how they've become an inspiration on a multitude of levels. And the fact that their medicine, their commitment to medicine, their medical revolution has ended up getting more attention than even their guerrilla efforts in Angola, their guerrilla efforts in Guinea-Bissau, their guerrilla efforts in Mozambique. That is one of the most impactful stories of the last 200 years on this planet. And we are so humbled to be able to make a small contribution to this effort. So the organizing has been going very well. We're picking up momentum all the time, and we're just going to keep on working, and we're just going to keep on organizing.
Right. So you're essentially trying to get Cuban medical solidarity for African people all over the world. You ask for the support of African people from the United
right
States.
now, yes. So the countries that the most attention, the most enthusiasm has come from, obviously from Zimbabwe, South Africa, Liberia, Guinea, Kenya, Eritrea, Ghana, and Nigeria. So just the fact that there's a level of interest there, we'll begin with those places. So we're just talking about stethoscopes for their doctors, syringes for their doctors, computers for their doctors. And the brainchild for this is a comrade of mine in the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association called Caleb Marapara, who's our former Secretary General, who is stationed in Algeria because he's in the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education. So he said, and I got a chance to see the Cuban doctors in Bulawayo, the second largest city in Zimbabwe. 4 of them live in the equivalent of a HBCU dormitory. And they may be sharing a cell phone and sharing a computer. And that's a unique situation because they're in a country, they're blockaded by imperialism in a country sanctioned by imperialism. So you know how scarce the resources are. And even though they've been able to maintain a medical presence in Africa, we must be mindful of the fact that the blockade has cost them since 1962 nearly $200 billion. So the fact that when we talk about investment in Africa, and most people sound like an extended mouthpiece of the Council of Foreign Relations, an extended mouthpiece of the Corporate Council on Africa, instead of us getting on a soapbox and flexing our muscle intellectually like bodybuilders do their muscles, we're obligated by history to provide an alternative. And we feel that we have an alternative that will resonate with people regardless of where they are on the political ideological spectrum. If they're in fraternities and sororities, we figured that this will touch their heart. If they're in churches, this will touch their heart. If they're in civil rights organizations, this will touch their hearts. If they're in nationalist organizations and consider themselves new Africans, this will touch their soul. If they're old Africans like us, they'll say, damn, this is about time something like this is happening. So we feel that the youth can identify with this, our women can identify with this, our veteran organizers can identify with this, our everyday people can identify with this.
So a lot of times when we engage in Cuba solidarity work as African people, we get pushback, maybe from some of the folks you mentioned who are like, that's not an African nation. Why are we in solidarity with them? Black and brown solidarity is not real. But my experience in Cuba is that it is an African nation, that its population is majority African and has been for quite some time. But can you talk about how African Cuba really is?
Oh, I mean, you know, the most dominant culture in Cuba is Yoruba culture, which comes from Nigeria the last time I checked. And when you go through the streets of Havana and the streets of Camagüey and the streets of Santiago, you may think you're in Nsukka, you may think you're in Ozobolo, you may think you're in Newi, you may think you're in Enugu, you may think you're in Lagos, you may think you're in Abuja. So when people say that, they're just talking to be talking. And what you have is little league nationalism that certain people have. And you have people like Carlos Moore, who is breastfed by the, politically breastfed by the Ford Foundation and the National Endowment for Democracy to write the garbage that he does to exploit something. And then you have people who talk about, oh, racism in Cuba. And there are many people who buy into the narrative who we don't have a problem with. So if you hear Dr. Runoko Rashidi, he may run it. If you hear Dr. Umar Johnson, he may run it. If you hear Dr. Cornel West, he may run it. But I'll tell you what, as the most honorable Elijah Muhammad told Brother Malcolm when he was under his tutelage, let's put the dirty glasses next to the clean glasses and give our people a choice. So anytime that Dr. Rashidi or Dr. West or Umar Johnson want to get next to us and sit before our people so we can give our people a chance to choose after hearing both of us, which one should we be fighting more, racism in Cuba or the blockade in Cuba? Anytime they're ready to do it, any platform they're ready to do it, we're ready to deal with that. Because the bottom line is, and then of course, the mistake that people make, sister, is they begin the history of Cuba with the revolution in 1959. When Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois did his book, The World in Africa, in 1946, the chapter called The Rape of Africa, he chronicles every rebellion in this hemisphere since 1522. Cuba's well represented. Their first rebellion was by an African called Jose Aponte, who was beheaded and his head was put in a cage to intimidate people, and 299 rebellions came after that. And then the first all-African peoples political party in this hemisphere was in Cuba in 1908, Partido Independiente de Color, the Independent Party of Color. So for people who feel the Democratic Party is not our party, and you want to look at the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, the Democratic Party of Guinea, the Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, the how Kaunda built the United National Independence Party, rest in peace to him, in Zambia. You can add the Partido Independiente Color to our efforts to build independent parties that we control, that are vehicles that tell our story, representing our narrative, representing our culture. And further than that, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie were making music with Machito in the 1940s, the first all-African jazz band in Cuba. The face of their space program is an African that went to space with Moscow. The face of their artistic revolution is an African named Nicholas Guillen, who they called the Langston Hughes of Cuba. And Sonia Sanchez tells you when she went to Cuba and she met him, as soon as he heard her speak, he could hear Langston Hughes' influence. He cried and he hugged her and he said, "Como se Langston?" So the ties are old. And of course, I got to deal with this, and I feel comfortable because I'm at home on this platform. The other problem is the Marxist-Leninist interpretation of Cuban solidarity that begins with, that talks about two things: Madiba Nelson Mandela's Martí Award and the fighting in Angola, which is the Soviet narrative, because the ANC was Soviet supported and MPLA was Soviet supported. However, when we look at the true African story, how do you talk about Cuban African solidarity and not mention Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first one to acknowledge him? How do you not mention Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the second one to acknowledge them? How do you not mention Ahmed Ben Bella, who John F. Kennedy tried to bribe and tell him to cancel his trip to Cuba? And when he went to Cuba, he not only did he go, he prepared his speech in Spanish. How do you not include Ahmed Sekou Touré, since Guinea is the first place Comandante Fidel Castro went to on the African continent? How do you not include all of these different people? So we understand the manipulation of the narrative, even amongst progressive and revolutionary circles. And then, of course, this question of being anti-Cuba, it's nothing new. Bayard Rustin, who Kwame Ture considered his first influence in the movement, until he said he saw Malcolm devour him into a debate. When he became a born-again social democrat, what did he do? He came out against the Cuban Revolution. The reason he justified supporting UNITA in Angola, he said, to stop Cuba's influence in Southern Africa. And he was correct, because you know why? Because the second recipient of the Jose Marti Award is the late Pan-African icon, Robert Mugabe. And when Comandante Fidel came to the Non-Aligned Movement Conference in 1986 in Zimbabwe, and he was going back and forth to the Cuban embassy, directing the armed struggle in Angola, fighting shoulder to shoulder with them. He made an agreement to train Zimbabwean teachers. And between 1986 and 1996, 3,000 Zimbabwean teachers went to Cuba for training. That is the reason Zimbabwe has a 97% literacy rate today. So, And Thomas Sankara is the first recipient of the Marti Award, African Head of State, in 1984. And we know that 3.5 million children were safely, genuinely, organically vaccinated because of a program in conjunction with Cuba. So Cuba's track record in Africa, Cuba's track record of keeping Robert Williams safe, Assata Shakur safe, Nahanda Obiodun safe, the solidarity is unbreakable. And it's not even solidarity anymore. It's camaraderie. It's elevated from, it started off as solidarity, but as you said, we consider them part of Africa. So it's camaraderie. So the same enemies that the most genuine forces in Africa has, Cuba's going to have. So that's why Biden has to support the sanctions. He's got to pay homage to Kennedy. He's got to pay homage to George Wallace. He's got to pay homage to Eastland. And as far as we're concerned, all Zionist Israel was doing, the only other idiot country to support the blockade, they're paying homage to who they are. So for those of you who think that Zionist Israel only has Palestinian blood on its hands, you're wrong. They've got Cuban blood on their hands. They've got Zimbabwean blood on their hands because they supported the Rhodesians. They've got Namibian blood on their hands because they supported German colonialism. They've got Tunisian blood on their hands because they refused to recognize the sovereignty of Tunisia. They've got Algerian blood on their hands. Anywhere Africans have progress and stability in the world, Zionist Israel feels obligated to make our dreams come true a nightmare. So they're our enemies, and we appreciate them for being consistent, because you want your enemies to be consistent so you never function from the illusion that they're on the verge of becoming your friend. And we have many in our community who have a love affair with Israel, but claim to be friends of Cuba. The time has come for them to choose. So Harry Belafonte needs to figure it out. He needs to figure out, does he love Israel more than he loves Cuba? And many of the others who have supported the Zionist state of Israel and love Israel more than mothers love their babies love their mother's breast milk, they've got a choice to make as well. The lines are drawn. Where will you stand? And we thank Joe Biden for being true to the white supremacist definition of the Democratic Party, give it functioning under no illusions. And you now know when Barack Obama would make statements that didn't make any political sense, any historical sense, you know who the ventriloquist was, pulling every string behind his back.
Another fact
So
about
we
Israel,
thank Biden for that.
Another fact about Israel that I just wanted to throw out in terms of it being an enemy of Africa, Israel's #1 export is diamonds. There is no diamond mine. There is not a single diamond mine in Israel. Guess where Israel gets its diamonds from? Yes. From Southern Africa, y'all. They are stolen from Africa. They are exported to Israel to be refined, and they are sold all over the world. And the African people living in those nations where those mines are get none of the profit, see none of the resources.
And the hatred towards every liberation movement in Southern Africa stems from the fact that back when the Organization of African Unity, as it was called then, now the African Union, when their Liberation Committee would have their meetings to give updates of their armed struggles, Yasser Arafat felt compelled and obligated to come in person to reaffirm the unbreakable bond between Palestinians and Africans. And the Israelis have never forgot that. And one of the main architects of the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act was a Zionist in Congress named Tom Lantos, the same one who attacked Khalid Mohammed. He walked Barack Obama to the podium when he was a senator to attack Zimbabwe. And Obama wrote a letter to Bush in 2006 saying, don't lift the sanctions on Zimbabwe until the dark cloud of Mugabe and ZANU-PF has been ousted from power. You can go and look it up. It's there for you. And so the fact that Zionist Israel supported German colonialism in Namibia, we haven't forgotten that. And when we were babies in struggle, we were the youngest organization to join the Worldwide African Anti-Zionist Front, which emanates out of Libya. And at the time, we had a meet 30 years ago. I was in a meeting at Ujimashule in the basement. We told Brother Kwame we wanted to join that. We were very interested. He said, I have a meeting with Kwame Afod tonight, who was the head, who had replaced Imari Obadeli as the head of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. And so we're sitting in the meeting, and a member of the Maryland chapter, what's his name? Atiba Nkrumah, he didn't feel we should be there because we were too young. And Brother Kwame fought for us to be there. And so when I talked with him afterwards, I said, why were you so adamant about us being there? He said, one of the standout experiences I had in Guinea when I first got there, the first Central Committee meeting I attended of the Democratic Party of Guinea, I noticed that the most important phases of the meeting, Sekou Touré had some of the youngest cadre and the youngest militants in their early 20s around him. So it's no way that we could exclude you from the meeting, and y'all may end up doing more work than any rest of these folks. How do we know? So that was just one of those experiences. So yeah, we from very young understood that Palestinian solidarity is at the tip of the iceberg, to show our people the crimes against humanity that Israel has committed against the African world, which they have to answer for. And for those of you who like rubbing shoulders with the African Union, the time has come to tell the African Union to strip Israel of its observer status. What the hell are they doing looking at us anyway? They need to find something else better to look at. And if they're going to look at us, let them work hard to do it. Let the Mossad spend the money that the United States gives them to watch us, to bug our phones, to follow us around. Don't give them a free, up close view of what we're trying to do to better ourselves. They should never be let into the African Union to observe us.
All right, thank you so much. So I want to take it back to Cuba Solidarity and the Get Out of Cuba's Way campaign. You mentioned that Cuba's medical solidarity around the world has almost like eclipsed in terms of awareness its solidarity with anti-colonial struggles in Africa and throughout the colonized world. And that's definitely a result of like an intentional strategy on the part of Cuba that people don't really give Cuba credit for. Like Cuba was like, okay, y'all are going to blockade us, y'all are going to starve us, you're going to collectively punish us. We're going to be helpful comrades all over the planet. We're going to be reasonable and good people, and we're going to show up humanistically, and then people are going to be like, what are you doing? And that is precisely what has happened. And so I wanted to ask, like, what lessons do you think we as revolutionary African people, as anti-imperialists, can take from the Cuban Revolution and Cuba's strategy of moving in the modern day?
It's just a universal approach to revolution. If you look at any revolution in the world, they had attributes that were the cornerstones of their efforts. In Guinea-Bissau, during the days of Amilcar Cabral, it was the agronomy. In Zimbabwe, it's the educational system. It's the women's empowerment, because 68% of that farming is done by women, in case you didn't know. And of course, we know because of our commitment to the Nkrumah's direction. When imperialists used to say that he was desperate to bring together Africa and he was being idealistic and negligent of Ghana, after the coup, the world got to see that 68 factories were built, a tire factory, a rubber factory, a cocoa factory, a bicycle factory. Even Queen Elizabeth said, my lord, your roads are better than ours. So it's very important when we talk about revolutions to show the human aspects, human dimensions of the revolutionary process. And for those of us who live inside United States borders, who know that the struggle for quality health is arguably our biggest obstacle. When the National Medical Association was formed in 1896, it was formed because of white supremacy and racism, naked racism. We couldn't join the American Medical Association. Their attitude was like, if we had our way, you'd still be picking cotton and tobacco. What are you doing with a white coat on, talking about you gonna operate on someone? The one based on the contentious relationship they had, the one issue that Booker T. Washington and Du Bois agreed on was the healthcare question. Booker T. Washington established Negro Health Month in this country before he left us. Following the momentum of the Philadelphia Negro, Du Bois' next sociological experiment was called The Physique and Health of the Negro American, showing that we were more vulnerable in the arena of health than we were when we lived on shacks in the plantation. So we've been fighting. The mistake we make is we confine our health agenda to the never-ending lovers quarrel between Democrats and Republicans. So what this does is it gives us a chance to have some breathing room to show that we can do something completely independent of them, because we must think independent of them, but we must act independent of them. So not only are we calling for Cuban medical personnel to come here and work with the National Medical Association, work with the Black Nurses Association, we also feel that there are certain places they should be where they'd be welcome. They should be in the prison infirmaries. They should be on Native American reservations. So the strategy, that's the quote unquote aspect of it inside United States borders. So for those people who suffer from plantation love and don't feel that we should be talking about Africa unless we have something programmatic inside United States borders, in this particular instance, we have that as well. So, and that is truly being Pan-African, as you know, because the misperception of Pan-Africanism is we're talking about, when we say Africa is primary, we're saying Africans at home and abroad should embrace that position. But that does not mean we're exempt from frontline activity in the diaspora. That is one of the biggest misnomers about how we maneuver, how we organize. But I think that part of that is because of the bastardization of methodology. Many have been hiding behind their ideologies for too long. So we feel that by coming up with projects that capture the imagination, capture the minds and hearts of our people, we'll create the climate and atmosphere for our political parties who are functioning on a long term to flourish. So we feel that, so this is why not only the medical aspect of it, but their educational system. And this is the reason why before the Bush administration called them an outpost of tyranny, Clinton, submitting to the demands of Ted Turner and General Electric, took Cuba off the Pentagon security list. The Chronicle of Higher Education, Harvard was in Cuba, Tulane was in Cuba, Duke was in Cuba, Berkeley was in Cuba. And as a matter of fact, the administrators of Bowie State University only felt it was okay after they saw the white colleges do it first. So those of us who are fighting for affirmative action, those of us who are fighting to preserve African independent schools, those of us who support HBCUs, those of us who support PBIs like Chicago State University, which didn't start out for Africans, but Africans have consumed the student body. This is your fight. This is your fight. So they are attractive to people for because of education. They're attractive because of healthcare. And if you see we're going to re-show the concert that we did at the end of February again, because this one, the Cubans were so amazed and touched by the concert we did in July, they felt that they should dominate the lineup the second time. So when people see Cubans doing jazz, Cubans doing merengue, Cubans doing reggae, Cubans doing hip hop, it's going to show people how art is also a key aspect of the revolutionary personality in Cuba, and how Africans dominated, and how the African identity has not been suppressed, not been repressed, not been marginalized. So the more people learn about them, and as Comandante Fidel Castro said to us when we were listening to him at the Organization of Caribbean and Latin American Youth, he said that in the 4 months that Elian Gonzalez was here, who is now a father, by the way, he said, the average US citizen learned more in 4 months than they had in 41 years about Cuba. Since the corona outbreak, the genocidal pandemic, corona pandemic, the average US citizen learned more about Cuba's healthcare system in 1 year than they had in 59 years. And so now you have mayors in the United States rejoicing around the 4 vaccinations they've created, Abdallah, Sovereign 1 and 2 in Mambisa, and what they were doing with interferon alpha 2B, which they developed in 1986 to combat HIV/AIDS. So, and then the multitude of things they deal with, how they've saved thousands of lives in the Caribbean when we're afflicted by natural disasters, how they're on the verge of eradicating blindness in the Americas in conjunction with Venezuela through Operation Project Miracle. So the greatest miracle of all is that people are getting a chance to see that everything they've been told about them is a lie, and people are looking at what they practically have to offer at this very turbulent moment in history. And like I said, we are just humbled that we can play a tiny, 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 tiny role in helping their efforts flourish.
I feel like everything you say is like so packed full of knowledge, and it's incredible. And I really, really, really appreciated when you said that Pan-Africanism means that we as African people understand that Africa is primary, that Africa is our home, but it also means that we have to be on the front line of the fight wherever our people are. Wherever we find ourselves, we have to fight side by side with our people. Like that is part of Pan-Africanism too. So I definitely appreciate you pointing that out.
And to see our students, like we had a 14-year-old student write an article about the Get Out of Cuba Way campaign in the San Francisco Bayview newspaper. I've been teaching him since he was 5. You know what I'm saying? So just to see that this is resonating with them. And I want to bet with, I wish he was here, I want to bet with Brother Kwame, because he used to tease us and say we were spending a lot of time in high schools when we were younger. And he asked us why, because he said, you know, if you talk to 100 college students, you're talking to students all over the country, all over the world. If you talk to 100 high school students, they go to that neighborhood. And we laughed at him, and he said, "You don't agree?" I said, "Well, we live in DC, the DC metropolitan area, one of the most internationally diverse parts of the United States. So when we go into a high school, there are students there born in Africa, born in the Caribbean, born in the Spanish-speaking parts of the America, the French-speaking parts of the America. Not only that, when they go to college, they're not going to go to Howard exclusively, UDC exclusively, George Washington exclusively. They're going to go all over the country. So if they're already working with us, then they'll be working with us versus waiting for you to come on the campus and hear about us for the first time." And I said, "I'm gonna prove it to you." So the next time he came back to DC, we had 40 high school students come to hear him. He met a student from Guinea whose grandmother was his neighbor, lived down the street from him. So he was like, okay. And that was one of the beautiful things about him. If he challenged you and you could prove what you were saying to him, he'd embrace it like he was the one who came up with the idea. He was very humble in that way, extremely.
So you mentioned the Get Out of Cuba's Way campaign. You described it not only as something that all Africans can unite about, regardless of our political affiliation, whether we're nationalists or reformists or what have you, we can all unite on the question of healthcare. We can all unite on the fact that our people are not getting access to the healthcare that's going to keep them alive. So like as a project, that objective is in place, but also the idea that we as African people have the right to develop independent relations with Cuba on our own terms, that we don't have to be subservient to the United States in that respect. So it's also like a nationalist project.
Yes, and many people are coming. I mean, we fought for that, and we've just watched it in the last 20 something years. And even though there are people who are finally realizing that they can be independent, because we remember President Obama's high profile field trip where he called for the loosening of the blockade. And many people thought we were being harsh. And we just said it simply. We said, okay, if you went and told all of our people at the height of lynching, don't worry about it. They not, because of our efforts, they're not going to make the noose as tight as possible. They'll loosen it up, but you still gonna hang. Or if the police cuff you, the cuffs aren't going to be tight, but you're still going to be shackled. You understand what I'm saying? So that's how we looked at the mockery of the argument. So now there are more people interested in developing people-to-people relationships, because at the end of the day, the sister city concept is still controlled by the United States Agency for International Development. So you're better off who was caught in Cuba 5 years ago, trying to get Cubans to rise up against the government in a seminar to deal with HIV/AIDS. And this is the most dangerous organization in the world. Obama's mother was part of it. That's what she was doing, hanging out in Indonesia in the early 60s and what have you. And as we have gone from COINTELPRO to OINTELPRO, overt intelligence, this organization oversees, they have a relationship with the military aspect of the United States foreign policy, the diplomatic aspect of the policy, efforts to invest. As a matter of fact, if you're an African investor on the continent and you want to do business in the United States, you have to go through their screening process. They control all the sister city projects and what have you. And so you just had the meeting in Venezuela, which I know you're aware of, the Bolivarian Alliance of Our Americas. Their number one position is to run the United States Agency for International Development out of all these places. Eritrea is the first place to expel them in Africa. Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia under Evo Morales, Nicaragua, and Suriname took this position with Alba, and Putin expelled them from Russia like 6-7 years ago. So the fact that we have to create, because we gave the statistics earlier, 22 of the 25 poorest nations in the world are in Africa, and we have 400 million people living on $1.90 a day. But on paper, it says that Africa has received $4 trillion in humanitarian aid in the last 70 years. But we know that their aid comes with strings because, as a matter of fact, when neocolonialism was written and when the United States government saw the manuscript form, they had a check for $33 million in humanitarian aid to go to Ghana. And after they read that book, they ripped it up. So we know that their aid is conditional anyway. So what we're saying is, if more of our people are talking about investing in Africa, this is the best project we feel that we can invest in this historical moment. We've been invited to Ghana to PANAF. Of course, we're not going physically, we'll be by Zoom. But when people going to Ghana, like gamblers go to Las Vegas and Atlantic City, we feel that this call to action will resonate with many of them. Nigeria being the largest, these Nigerian young people who we've been talking to, they love the idea very much. So, and the one thing, and I know we're coming up to an end, that's very impressive, I think, as much as neocolonialism in Africa disgusts us, we saw a few nations submit to Trump and break ties with Cuba's medical brigade. Ecuador was one, a couple of others. Not one nation in Africa broke ties with the Henry Reed Medical Brigade that have them there. And all of them, like clockwork, vote against the blockade. Now, that does not mean that they won't get, those heads of states won't get on their knees and shine Joe Biden's shoes till he can see his face. But on the question of Cuba, their people insist that they hold the line. So we think that based on that, we're just going to be, we are picking up engagement with many. It was another place I forgot, the Congo. Through our comrade Maurice Carney and the Friends of the Congo, he's arranging for some folks in the Congo to be involved in this as well. So if by the end of this year, we're beginning to channel medical resources to help Cuba's efforts on the African continent. And the reason we feel that's important is because when they're not treating the sickest of the sickest and the most challenging parts to get to, this is what else they do. They train the young people who make a pact and an oath that they're not going to leave their nations and come to the United States or to Germany or to France. They are trying to reverse the brain drain, which is nothing but the extension of our initial captivity 402 years ago. So the fact that they're doing that, because one of Comandante Fidel Castro's dreams was to build a campus modeled after the Latin American School of Medical Sciences on the African continent as what he called Cuba's never-ending commitment to pay their debt to Africa for colonialism and captivity. So until that happens, and they can continue to send doctors there to fight Ebola, to fight HIV/AIDS, to fight against drought, to fight against malaria, to fight against cholera, how can we sit there and watch them do that, understanding how the blockade compromises them and not make a contribution to that effort? We should be willing to do that with our eyes closed, and we should be willing to pay the ultimate price. I have to say, I discovered during my time at Bowie State University, I was under FBI investigation. And when I had my lawyer talk to them, for you young organizers out there, you don't have to talk to the FBI when they come looking for you. Send a lawyer their way. But they said, oh, he hasn't done anything, but when someone spends as much time with the Cuban diplomats as he does, it's a routine that we just have to check you out. And our response was, you go and tell that agent that if the disciples of J. Edgar Hoover decide to end our time on this planet, we couldn't think of a better reason to go than standing firmly with the Cuban people. On that note, we thank you. We know we've gone over time.
Can you just end by very briefly saying how people can support the Get Out of Cuba's Way campaign?
They can go to the hashtags. You mentioned them. Hashtag Get Out Cuba Way, hashtag Unblock Cuba, hashtag Cuban Blockade Inhumane. My email address is obiegbuna15@gmail.com. And like I said, we're looking to get artists involved, journalists involved, or different organizations that focus on this area. And the support has been extremely strong. And we're only just beginning. And we look forward to the future on this. Things are building up. You've seen the work And we thank you for your praises of our work. And that will encourage us to work harder. And we thank you for your work as well. Young warrior doing your work.
Thank you so much for joining the program today and for all of the incredible wisdom that you shared with us. I know that people learned a lot. They were in the comments cutting up because they were feeling what you were saying. So thank you so much.
So thank you. And we hope that some of the people in the comments get in touch with us to do some of this work. They got to do more than commentate.
He just called y'all out. I put his email in the chat. You better reach out.
So thank you, African.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay.
So that was our comrade Obi Egbuna Jr. of the Get Out of Cuba's Way campaign in a very wide-ranging conversation. Like, I learned so many things from him just talking for 45 minutes. I am so grateful. Like Pope John Paul, I didn't know he was anti-socialist. It makes sense. But I remember coming up hearing about how that guy was like the best pope ever, how they wanted to like make him a saint and all this kind of stuff. And he was going to Nicaragua talking about take out the Sandinistas. Well, damn. So yeah, I appreciate that comrade so much. Every time he talks, I learn incredible things. So thank you, Obi, so much for joining us. And please check out the Get Out of Cuba's Way campaign at that hashtag. And also email the comrade. I just put his email address in the comments. And I'm sure if you want to contribute to that campaign or learn more, that he will be very grateful to hear from you. Anywho, let's keep it moving because I am so hungry. It's time for me to eat soon. But in terms of things that are going on here in Tiwa territory with New Mexico chapter, the Pan-African Community Garden Project is flourishing. We were out there last weekend. We planted pomegranates. We planted goji berries that were contributed by our comrade Afro Phoenix in New Mexico chapter. We learned about 4th of July and why we celebrate it. We talked about our own individual relationship with the U.S. empire. The youth came through with some deep anti-Americanism. It was quite beautiful. We also have so we're not going to be at the garden this coming Sunday because this Sunday is July 4th, which means it's time for our annual commemoration of 4th of July. We are not celebrating American Independence Day. We are celebrating resistance to the U.S. empire, y'all. We know that on July 4th, 1776, African people were in chains. Indigenous people were experiencing genocide and broken treaties. Colonized peoples all over the world were catching hell. And so July 4th is not our Independence Day, y'all. July 4th is the day that we talk about how much we hate the United States. It's going to be incredible. Sunday, July 4th, at Phil Chacon Park here in Tiwa territory, 12 to 5 p.m. We're going to have speakers from organizations doing great work for the community here in Tiwa territory. Organizations like, of course, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the Hookup, Pueblo Action Alliance, La Raza Unida, the Brown Berets. We're going to have performers, including conscious hip-hop artists with anti-police songs. I'm so excited. We're going to have free food from our comrades at John Brown Breakfast Club. We're going to have free childcare from our comrades at Free Access to Movement. We're going to have body work. If you want a massage for free, it's going to be a beautiful community space. Family-friendly, youth and elders are welcome. Queer folks are welcome. And it's going to be anti-imperialist and anti-American as heck, complete with a flag burning. So if you are free, Sunday, July 4th, from 12 to 5 p.m. at Tiwa territory, come through for 4th of July. It is going to be a very great day. I guarantee that you will learn quite a bit and have a lot of fun as well as eat some good food. Also, Sunday, July 25th, speaking of the necessity of solidarity with Cuba, like, man, if you are not convinced that we as African people need to be in solidarity with Cuba after hearing that man speak, I want to know what's wrong with you. Cuba is an African nation. Cuba is a nation that has showed up for Africa's liberation struggle for decades, even after suffering under a blockade that is intended to starve them to death collectively. Cuba is still sending doctors and troops and politicians all over the world to assist African liberation struggles. So, of course, we as African people in the belly of the beast, we as African people living in the empire that's attacking Cuba, have to show up for Cuba. There's no question whatsoever in my mind. So here in Tiwa territory, on Sunday, July 25th at noon, we are going to have our monthly Cuba Solidarity Car Caravan. We're going to be calling for an end to the U.S. blockade on Cuba, an end to the U.S. government's attempts to destroy the Cuban Revolution by cruising up and down Central with our cars decorated. We have Cuban flags for every single car. We have window crayons. We have signs. You'll hear some speakers, you'll decorate your car, and then you'll go up and down Central with us honking. It is a good time. It's a good time. Even if you just like want to be loud, it's a good time. But you should come because you want to be loud and you want to be in solidarity with Cuba. So that's Sunday, July 25th, 12 p.m. We're going to meet at the El Mesquite parking lot in San Pedro and Central. You can check out the flyer in the little slideshow that I'll share after the program's over. And please spread the word. Please bring your family and your friends. And let's make a big-ass car caravan for Cuba, y'all. Cuba deserves it. We need to show up for Cuba. In terms of updates for the international wing of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, we, of course, have coming up this month Pan-African Women's Day. Pan-African Women's Day. I'm extremely excited. We are going to have a panel of young women speakers from all over the African continent, y'all. We got a moderator from Toronto. We got another moderator from Azania. We got a keynote speaker from Guinea-Bissau representing Udamu. We got panelists from the Revolutionary Socialist League of Kenya, Horn of Africa PALs representing Eritrea, the All-African Women's Revolutionary Union in Burkina Faso. Oh my God, who is the fourth one? Oh yeah, and then comrade with the Amilcar Cabral Ideological Institute out of Nigeria. So 6 different African nations represented just among the panelists and the keynote speaker. It's going to be so good. There's no one above the age of 30 on the panel. It's all young women speakers. And they're going to be talking about building Pan-Africanism in the 21st century, making sure that women and non-men and youth are on the forefront, talking about the issues they're organizing against in those African nations. It's going to be so good. Can you tell I'm extremely excited? So it is happening Sunday. Actually, no. Let me make sure. Make sure I have the right day. It's happening July 31st at 10 a.m. Mountain Time or 4 p.m. UTC time. That's the time in West Africa. You must register to attend the webinar on Zoom, and I'm going to drop the registration link in the chat. So please, please, please register, especially if you need translation. If you want to hear the Portuguese speakers translated into English and so on, then please register for the Zoom webinar at the link I just dropped. Again, it's happening July 31st, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, 4 p.m. UTC time. That is Pan-African Women's Day. It's going to be an incredible event, and we're going to keep talking about that in the weeks coming on each program, and the flyer will be in the slideshow at the end. Also, the weekly Pan-African News Show is just one of several All-African People's Revolutionary Party produced podcasts. We're one of 5, actually. So we're Thursdays at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. Mondays at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. The Kaji Circle out of New York produces the Pantsula podcast. The Pantsula podcast is incredibly strong, again, made up of a number of youth who are in this online circle all over the world who are producing this weekly show, covering an in-depth topic every single week. So that's Mondays at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Also, Comrade Ajamu, who is a friend of the program, has his weekly show with his daughter Shakura. Sundays at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. This coming Sunday, they have an episode dedicated to 4th of July, so it should be great. Also, our comrade Mzuri in the California chapter, along with our comrade Halimatu out of Germany, have the Revolutionary African Woman podcast once a month on Saturdays. This past Saturday actually was the most recent episode, and I watched it, and it was so good. They had as a guest Mukasa Ricks. Mukasa Ricks is, of course, famously known as the man who coined the term Black Power. Kwame Ture popularized the term. Mukasa Ricks came up with it. Mukasa Ricks was a longtime organizer in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee alongside Kwame Ture. He is now a member of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party and a revolutionary Pan-Africanist. And in that interview, he talks about how that political trajectory of going from Black Power to Pan-Africanism was just the wave and sick, y'all. It was the wave and snake. He talked about how they understood Black Power as being the same thing as Izwaletu and Azania, the same thing as a Mandela. It's basically a freedom call and an anti-colonial struggle is what he said. That they understood the struggle for African liberation in the United States as part of the global African struggle for Pan-Africanism and African liberation. It was so inspiring, and it really illustrates that we did not come out of nowhere with this Pan-Africanism stuff. It is actually the inevitable political trajectory of the African liberation struggle, and Snick definitely embodied that. So please check out that interview. He's super funny. And there's also a comrade from the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania talking about the international influence of Kwame Ture, who actually worked side by side with him, a very, very powerful sister. So the show was really great, and I feel like people should watch it. Every single person should watch it. In fact, when I play the slideshow, I'm going to drop the link to it in the chat so folks can check it out. And then the last APIP podcast that I want to shout out is the Forward Ever podcast, which you can listen to on Spotify. That is put on by members of the APIP social media task force, another bunch of youth doing the revolutionary work. So please check out all of the assorted APIP podcasts that you can. You can almost watch one every day of the week. And cool, we're out here. So yeah, that's what's going on with APIP International. And now let's move to the clothing so I can eat food. So once again, my name is Onya Sanu. I am a cadre with the New Mexico chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is a mass revolutionary pan-African socialist political party based in Africa. Our strongest chapters are in Africa with the political objective of pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa, because we believe when Africa is free, our people all over the world, from Turtle Island to Azania, to Colombia, to Cuba, will be free. So that's who we are. This is Weekly Pan-African News. We do this show every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time, which means we'll be back next Thursday with another program. Also, today is Thursday, which means there's new articles on Hood Communist. New articles on the Hood Communist blog. Hood Communist is a collective revolutionary African nationalist blog project with representatives from organizations like Black Alliance for Peace, the Ujima People's Progress Party, Black Hammer, of course, the APRP, all working together to produce some revolutionary African content. So we're going to have new articles on the blog shortly. Please check them out. Please read them. And importantly, please share them and then talk about them with your comrades. Like, we're not just putting this stuff out here because we want to. We're putting this writing out here because we want our people to read it and struggle over it. So please check out the Hood Communist blog at hoodcommunist.org. And as always, if you can hear me talking, if you can see me in front of your face, and you are not active in an organization fighting for the liberation of your people, you need to change that, comrade. You need to get off the sidelines and into the fight. We are facing in the capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist system the most organized and deadly enemy that this planet has ever faced. That is not hyperbole. That is just the reality of the situation. We are currently living through the end times in that the planet is warming. The sea level is rising. It is becoming too hot to live in increasing numbers of the world. We are facing a mega drought in the U.S. Southwest, for example, that people project is going to last for at least 100 years. So y'all, it's pretty bad. And not only does capitalism have no strategy whatsoever for making sure you can survive what's coming, but capitalism is continuing full steam ahead with destroying the planet. And so understanding that capitalism has put us on a trajectory of death, we must also understand that our only option for changing that trajectory is joining organizations fighting for justice, joining organizations fighting for liberation, joining organizations that are fighting to destroy capitalism and build a new system in its place. And the only way those organizations will be able to achieve that objective is if you and every single person talking, like listening to me talk right now, is active in an organization fighting for justice. Join an organization, y'all. There is no excuse. There's no excuse. And if the organization you want to see doesn't exist, if you have like perfect unicorn politics and no one's on your wavelength, then build the perfect unicorn politics organization yourself. Build the organization you want to see if the organization you want to see does not exist. Point blank period. But either way, you must be active in an organization fighting for justice and liberation so we can take out this beast. So thank y'all so much for tuning into the program. We will see you next Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. And now stay tuned for some flyers and some music advertising some upcoming APRP events. Have a good day.
Yeah. This is for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for the answer. Wish I could take your tears and replace them with laughter. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza. Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for the answer. Wish I could take your tears and replace them with laughter. Long live Palestine. while we listen to tunes made by ignorant fools. Israel blocked the UN from delivering food. They bring in the troops and you won't even glimpse at the news. They make money off the products that we're quick to consume. And it's not simply a question of differing views. Forget emotions, this is facts, what I spit is the truth. Makes no difference if you're a Christian or if you're a Jew. They're just people living in different conditions to you. They still die when you bomb their schools, mosques and hospitals. It's not because of rockets, please God, can you stop this all? I'm not related to the strangers on the TV, but I relate, cause those strangers could have been me. Words could never ever explain the raw tragedy. It's not a war, they're just murdering more rapidly, and we're automatically supporting pure savagery. Imagine how you feel if this was your family.
Free my people, long live Palestine. We will never let you go.
Sing it with me now. Free, free Palestine. 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 Palestine remains in my heart forever. We stand for peace, times of war. We shan't surrender. Remember, it didn't start in this dark December. Every coin is a bullet if you're Marks and Spencer. And when you're sipping Coca-Cola, that's another pistol in the holster of them soulless soldiers. You say you know about the Zionist lobby, but you put money in their pocket when you're buying their coffee. Talking about revolution sitting in Starbucks. The fact is, that's the type of thinking I can't trust, let alone even start to respect. Before you talk, learn the meaning of that scarf on your neck. Forget Nestle, Obama promised Israel 30 billion over the next decade. They're trigger happy and they're crazy. Think about that when you're putting Huggies nappies on your baby.
Free my people, long live Palestine. We will never let you go.
Sing it with me now. Free, free Palestine. 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 It's not just a war over stolen land. Why do you think little boys are throwing stones at tanks? And we'll never really know how many people are dead. They drop bombs on innocent girls while they sleep in their bed. Don't get offended by facts, just try and listen. Nothing is more anti-Semitic than Zionism. So please don't bring bad vibes when you speak to me. There's plenty of rabbis that agree with me. It's your choice what you do with this message, don't get it confused. I view this from a human perspective. How many more resolutions have to be violated? How many more children have to be annihilated? Israel is a terror state, they're terrorists that terrorize. I testify my television, televise, I'm telling lies. This is not a war, it is systematic genocide. But whatever they try, Palestine will never die.
Free my people, long live Palestine. We will never let you go.
Sing it with me now. Free, free Palestine. 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 Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for an answer. Wish I could take your tears and replace them with laughter. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza. Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for an answer. Wish I could take your tears and replace them with laughter. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza.